The train carriage smelled of wet wool and stale coffee, a scent that usually signaled a mundane commute, but for Clara Valeska, it smelled like the sharp ozone-heavy air right before a lightning strike. Her breath hitched, stuttering in her chest as she pressed her forehead against the cool, vibration-heavy glass of the window. Every rhythmic clack-clack of the steel wheels against the tracks felt like a countdown, a frantic heartbeat she couldn't slow down. She wasn't just a passenger, she was a ghost in a floral thrift store coat, fleeing a house that had become a mausoleum of her own spirit. She had left everything. The bruises under her foundation were still tender, a map of a 3-year marriage to a man who used his wealth like a silencer and his fists like judges' gavels. But as the city lights of her nightmare faded into the blur of the countryside, the relief she expected didn't come. Instead, a cold, predatory chill crawled up her spine. It wasn't the wind from the drafty door. It was the presence of the man sitting directly across from her in the secluded corner of the first-class cabin. A cabin she'd emptied her secret savings to sit in, thinking it would be safer. He was a mountain of tailored charcoal wool and silence. His hands, large and scarred across the knuckles, were folded over a silver-topped cane. He hadn't moved in an hour. He hadn't even blinked. He was Julian Moretti, though she didn't know his name yet, only that the air seemed to bow in his presence. He was the kind of man who didn't look for trouble because trouble usually checked the locks when it heard him coming. He was a king of an underworld she'd only heard about in hushed, terrified whispers, and now fate had locked her in a high-speed metal box with him. Clara's hand trembled as she reached for her water, her sleeve slipping just enough to reveal the dark purple ring around her wrist. In that split second, the man's eyes, dark, obsidian, and impossibly sharp, shifted. They didn't just see her, they dissected her. "You're running," he said. His voice wasn't a question. It was a low, gravelly vibration that seemed to rumble through the floorboards. "And you're doing it poorly." Clara froze, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Was he one of her husband's associates? Was this the end before she'd even reached the beginning? The mystery of who this titan was and why his gaze felt more protective than predatory sent a jolt of terrifying electricity through her. She was caught between the monster behind her and the devil in front of her. Hello to everyone watching from around the globe. Whether you're tuning in from the bustling streets of New York, the quiet suburbs of London, or the beautiful shores of Lagos, I am so incredibly grateful to have you here today. How are you all doing? I hope you're feeling as charged and ready for this journey as I am. Before we dive deeper into Clara's harrowing escape and the dark shadows surrounding Julian, take a quick moment to check. Have you subscribed to the channel yet? If not, please hit that button and join our community. Your support allows me to keep crafting these deep, emotional stories for you every single week. Trust me, you do not want to miss the twist coming in the next chapter. Where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments below. Clara looked into Julian's eyes, seeing a reflection of a world far more dangerous than the one she was leaving. "I'm not running," she lied, her voice cracking. Julian leaned forward, the light catching the lethal edge of a ring on his finger. "Then why?" he whispered, leaning into her personal space until she could smell expensive sandalwood and cold iron. "Is there a black SUV currently tailing this train at 80 miles per hour? And why are there 3 men with suppressed handguns boarding at the next stop specifically for carriage 4? Clara's blood turned to ice. Her husband hadn't just followed her. He had sent professional hunters. And the only thing standing between her and a shallow grave was the most feared man in the tri-state area. A man who looked at her not with pity, but with a terrifying, sudden hunger to dismantle anyone who dared touch what was in his line of sight. Will Clara trust the man who rules the darkness to save her from her own? Or has she simply jumped from the frying pan into an incinerator? The silence that followed Julian's revelation was heavy, thick enough to choke the air out of Clara's lungs. She stared at him, her vision blurring as the reality of her situation crashed down. Her husband, Silas, didn't just want her back, he wanted her erased. He had always told her she was nothing without him, a broken doll he'd plucked from a waitress job and elevated. Now he was proving that even in her escape his reach was absolute. Clara's mind flickered back to the foundation of her misery. 3 years ago she had been Clara Deneuve from Belle de Jour, Hamilton from The Terminator. She had been a woman with dreams of opening her own bakery, a woman who laughed loudly and didn't flinch when a door slammed. Silas had dismantled that woman piece by piece. First, it was the suggestions on what to wear, then the isolation from her friends, and finally, the cold realization that the man who claimed to love her was a predator who thrived on her fear. Her deepest desire wasn't wealth or even a new romance. It was simply to wake up without a knot of terror in her stomach. She wanted to belong to herself again. Across from her, Julian watched the play of emotions on her face. He wasn't just a mafia boss to those who knew the shadows. He was Julian Kay from American Gigolo, Corleone from The Godfather. To the world, he was a monster of efficiency, a man who managed the flow of power with a cold, surgical precision. But beneath the charcoal wool suit and the expensive watch lay a man driven by a singular, burning motivation: a hatred for those who bullied the weak. His own father had been a tyrant, a man who ruled their household with the same iron fist Julian now used to rule the city's docks and distribution lines. Julian had vowed never to be that man, yet he had become a different kind of beast to survive. "Why are you telling me this?" Clara whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the wind against the train. "If you know who they are and you know who I'm running from, why aren't you handing me over? Silas has money. He'd pay you." Julian's lips thinned into a line that wasn't quite a smile. "Silas Miller is a cockroach who thinks he's a lion because he scares a woman who weighs 100 pounds soaking wet. I don't deal with cockroaches and I don't need his money." He shifted his weight, his cane clicking against the floor. "I have a distaste for wasted potential, Clara. And right now you're wasting your life by being a victim." In the seat behind them, a man in a nondescript gray suit lowered his newspaper just an inch. This was Elias Thorne, Julian's right-hand man and the only person who knew that Julian's ruthlessness was often a shield for a strange, buried sense of justice. Elias caught Julian's eye in the reflection of the window, a silent communication. The hunters were moving. Clara looked at her reflection in the dark glass. She saw the girl who used to bake bread until dawn, the girl who believed in fairy tales. That girl was gone. In her place was a woman who had jumped onto a midnight train with nothing but a burner phone and a heart full of glass shards. She looked back at Julian, sensing the hidden depths in him, the way he held his cane as if it were a weapon, the way his eyes softened for a fraction of a second when they landed on her bruised wrist. "I can't go back," she said, her voice finding a sudden sharp edge. "I'd rather jump off this train at full speed than let him touch me again." Julian felt a strange tug in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a decade. It was empathy, raw and inconvenient. "You won't have to jump," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous silk. "But if you stay with me, the world you enter will be louder than the one you left. There are no silk pillows in my house, Clara. Only iron gates." The train began to slow, the screech of the brakes singing a mournful tune. The next stop was coming. The men with the suppressed handguns were waiting. Clara felt the stakes rising. It wasn't just about her survival anymore. It was about whether she was willing to trade a domestic prison for a gilded cage owned by a king of shadows. "I see some of you joining us from the Philippines and South Africa. Welcome. It's so amazing to see how this story is connecting people across oceans. I have a question for you all. If you were in Clara's shoes, would you trust a man like Julian, or would you take your chances in the dark? Drop a trust or run in the comments. And if you're enjoying the tension so far, make sure you've hit that like button and subscribed. It really helps the channel grow so I can keep bringing these high-stakes dramas to life." As the train pulled into the dimly lit station, Julian stood up. He was even taller than he looked sitting down, a literal shadow cast over Clara. He extended a hand, not a soft hand but one that promised a different kind of strength. "The doors open in 30 seconds, Julian said. "Make a choice. Walk out there and let them take you, or walk behind me and let me show them why they should have stayed in the city." Clara looked at the door, then back at the scarred knuckles of the man who held the keys to a different kind of kingdom. She reached out, her small, trembling hand disappearing into his massive, steady grip. The seed of a mystery was planted. Why did a man who commanded thousands care about one broken woman on a midnight train? The hiss of the pneumatic doors was the sound of a guillotine blade falling. As the train groaned to a halt at the desolate, fog-shrouded platform of Oakhaven Station, the air in the carriage turned predatory. Clara's hand was still swallowed by Julian's, his grip a grounding wire for the lightning strike terror coursing through her veins. "Stay behind me," Julian commanded. His voice wasn't a whisper. It was a low-frequency vibration that seemed to command the very molecules of the room. Do not look at their faces. Do not speak. You are a shadow, Claire. Shadows don't bleed. From the far end of the carriage, 3 men stepped inside. They didn't look like the clumsy thugs Silas usually employed. These men wore tactical jackets and moved with the synchronized lethal grace of military-trained contractors. The lead man, a jagged-scarred individual named Anton Shiger from No Country for Old Men, Sovich from Eastern Promises, scanned the seats with cold, reptilian efficiency. His eyes locked onto the back of Clara's head and a cruel, knowing smirk twitched on his lips. "Mrs. Miller," Anton called out, his voice echoing in the metallic hollow of the train. "Your husband misses his property. He sent us to bring his favorite bird back to her cage. Don't make this messy. The cleaning crew hates blood on the upholstery." Clara flinched, her knees buckling, but Julian's hand tightened, not painfully but with a sudden, immovable strength. He didn't turn around. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a heavy, obsidian-black fountain pen, clicking it with a rhythmic, hypnotic snap. "This carriage is private property for the next 5 minutes," Julian said, his back still turned to the intruders. "You have exactly 3 seconds to step back onto that platform before I decide your lives are an administrative error I need to correct." Anton laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "And who the hell are you, old man? Some banker in a fancy suit? Move aside or you're collateral damage." Julian finally turned. The movement was so fluid, so deliberate that it felt like watching a mountain shift. When the light hit his face, the laughter in the carriage died a sudden, violent death. Anton froze. The 2 men behind him took an instinctive step back, their hands hovering near their waistbands where the suppressed handguns were tucked. They recognized the silver-topped cane. They recognized the obsidian eyes that had ordered the disappearance of entire syndicates without raising a finger. "Moretti," Anton breathed, the bravado draining from his face like water from a cracked vase. We didn't know she was with you. This is a domestic matter. Silas Miller is a man who owes me a shipment of high-grade steel and 3 apologies," Julian interrupted, stepping into the aisle, shielding Clara completely with his massive frame. He also clearly failed to mention that his wife has sought sanctuary with the Moretti family. "Which means, as of 10 seconds ago, you aren't just kidnapping a woman. You are declaring war on me." The tension snapped like a dry bone. Anton, realizing he couldn't return to Silas empty-handed without facing a worse fate, went for his weapon. What followed was a blur of calculated violence. Julian didn't use a gun. He moved with the terrifying economy of a man who had mastered the art of the kill long ago. His cane swept out, catching the second man's throat with a sickening crack before the man could even clear his holster. In the same motion, Julian's left hand shot out, grabbing Anton's wrist and twisting it with a sound like snapping kindling. The suppressed handgun clattered to the floor. Clara gasped, pressing her back against the window, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and a dark, forbidden thrill. She had spent years being the victim of a coward's violence. Now she was witnessing the protective wrath of a king. Julian leaned into Anton's face, his voice a lethal silk. "Tell Silas that if he wants his property back he can come to my estate and ask for her in person. I look forward to seeing the look on his face when I show him what a real monster looks like." He shoved the man toward the door. The 3 hunters scrambled back onto the platform, leaving a trail of blood and shattered pride behind them. The train doors hissed shut, and the engine roared back to life, pulling away from the station and leaving the nightmare behind, only to plunge Clara deeper into Julian's world. Julian turned back to her. His breathing hadn't even quickened. He reached out, his thumb catching a stray tear on Clara's cheek. For a moment, the ruthlessness vanished, replaced by an intensity that made her heart skip for an entirely different reason. "You're safe now," he whispered. "But you should know, Clara. Once you enter my gates there is no starting over. There is only moving forward. With me." "Well, did you see that coming? I told you Julian wasn't just a businessman. The way he handled those men, it's clear he's playing a much bigger game than we realized. I have to ask, do you think Clara is safer with a man like Julian, or has she just traded one type of danger for another? Let me know your theories in the comments. And hey, if you're gripping your seat right now, please make sure you've subscribed and turned on notifications. We're only in part 3 and the word count is climbing as the stakes get even higher. Help us reach our goal of 100,000 subscribers by the end of the month. Where are my Team Julian fans at? Shout out your city in the comments. Clara looked at his hand, the hand that had just broken a man's wrist without a second thought, and she realized the first major plot twist of her new life. She wasn't just running from a husband. She was being claimed by a legend. The train sped into the darkness, the destination no longer a mystery, but a destiny. The train journey ended not at a public station, but at a private siding draped in the silver mist of the highlands. Waiting for them was a fleet of black armored SUVs, their engines humming like purring predators. Julian led Clara toward the center vehicle, his hand never leaving the small of her back, a gesture that felt less like an escort and more like a claim. As the gates of the Moretti estate swung open, Clara gasped. This wasn't a house. It was a fortress of glass and black stone perched on a cliffside, overlooking a churning, violent sea. The architecture was sharp, modern, and intimidating, much like the man beside her. Inside, the air was pressurized, silent, and smelled of expensive cedar and old secrets. "This is your home for now," Julian said, his voice echoing in the vast marble foyer. "My staff, Clarice Starling from The Silence of the Lambs, Doyle from The French Connection, will show you to the East Wing. It is the most secure part of the house. Do not leave it without an escort." Clara watched as a woman with sharp eyes and a professional demeanor stepped forward. "Of course, Mr. Moretti. Miss, if you'll follow me." Over the next week, the tension didn't dissipate. It rearranged itself. Clara was safe from Silas's fists, but she was trapped in a world of high-stakes shadows. From her balcony she watched Julian. He was a whirlwind of motion, hosting hushed meetings with men in expensive suits, shouting orders over encrypted phones, and occasionally standing alone by the cliffside, staring at the waves as if he could command them to still. One evening, Clara found herself drawn to the library, a room filled with thousands of leather-bound books. She was reaching for a volume on historical architecture when a hand reached over her head to retrieve it. She spun around, her heart leaping. Julian was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. "You have a penchant for the classics," he remarked, handing her the book. His eyes weren't on the cover. They were tracing the line of her neck, where the last of the bruises was finally fading into a faint yellow. "I like things that endure," Clara whispered, her pulse fluttering. "Things that don't break when the wind changes." "Everything breaks, Clara. It's just a matter of how much pressure is applied." He stepped closer, his thumb grazing the pulse point at her wrist. The touch was electric, a searing contrast to the coldness of her life with Silas. For the first time, the attraction she felt wasn't born of fear, but of a magnetic, dangerous pull toward the man who had saved her. But as their connection deepened through shared late-night coffees and whispered conversations about their pasts, the monsters began to stir. Clara noticed Elias, Julian's right hand, watching her with a look of profound unease. One afternoon, while Julian was away, she cornered him in the hall. "Why do you look at me like I'm a ticking bomb, Elias?" she demanded. Elias sighed, checking the hallway before leaning in. "Because you are. Julian hasn't been the same since he brought you here. He's distracted. He's making moves against Silas Miller that are personal. He's risking the entire Moretti syndicate for a woman he met on a train. There are people in this organization, men far more ruthless than Julian, who don't like seeing their king lose his edge." He dropped a folder on the table. Inside were photos of Silas meeting with a man whose face was obscured. A man Elias whispered was a rival Mafia don looking to capitalize on Julian's distraction. Clara felt a cold dread settle in her gut. She had run to Julian for protection, but her presence was becoming the very thing that could destroy him. Was her growing love for him a beacon of hope, or the catalyst for a war that would leave them both buried? "Things are getting intense. Julian is risking his entire empire for Clara, and the sharks are starting to circle. I want to hear from you. Do you think Julian is being romantic or reckless? Is Clara a distraction, or is she the missing piece he's been searching for? We are moving toward the halfway point of this 40-minute epic. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with your favorite movie character's name. I might just use it for a guest appearance in a future story. Your engagement keeps these scripts coming. Are you ready for the twist that changes everything? That night, Julian found Clara in the garden. The air was cool, the scent of jasmine heavy. Without a word, he pulled her into his arms. The kiss was desperate, A collision of two souls who had spent too long in the dark. But as Clara melted into him, she saw a flicker of movement in the trees. A red laser dot dancing across Julian's shoulder. "Julian, move," she screamed. The crack of a rifle shattered the night, and the rising tension finally exploded into a deadly reality. The gunshot didn't just tear through the silence of the cliffside garden. It tore through the fragile illusion of safety Clara had finally allowed herself to feel. Julian moved with the instinct of a man born in a war zone. Before the echo of the rifle could fade, he had Clara pinned beneath him on the damp grass, his massive body a shield of muscle and expensive wool. "Elias. Perimeter breach, North Garden. Now." Julian roared into the comms unit on his wrist. The estate erupted into a hive of lethal activity. Searchlights swept the treeline, and the distant bark of guard dogs joined the frantic pounding of Clara's heart. But as Julian pulled her toward the stone bunker hidden beneath the gazebo, he didn't look angry. He looked devastated. Once inside the sterile, reinforced safety of the bunker, Julian gripped her shoulders, his eyes searching hers for injuries. "Are you hit? Claire, look at me. Did the round graze you?" "I'm fine," she gasped, her hands shaking so violently she had to tuck them into her armpits. "But Julian, they're here. Silas found me. I've brought the devil to your doorstep." Julian's jaw tightened, a vein pulsing in his temple. "Silas Miller didn't fire that shot, Clara. That was a professional. A long-range specialist from the Vane Syndicate. Silas doesn't have the connections to hire them." He paused, his obsidian eyes turning cold. "Which means someone told them you weren't just a runaway wife. Someone told them who you really are." Claire froze. The air in the bunker suddenly felt thin, as if the oxygen were being sucked out by a vacuum. She stepped back away from his touch, her shadow dancing long and jagged against the reinforced concrete wall. "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered, but the lie tasted like ash. Julian reached into the pocket of his tactical vest, the one he'd thrown on as the alarm sounded, and pulled out a charred, water-damaged passport. It wasn't the one she'd been carrying. It was the one he'd recovered from the train station lockers after his men had done a deep sweep. The name on the passport wasn't Clara Hamilton. It was Clara Selina from Batman, Kyle from The Big Short. And tucked behind the photo was a microfilm strip containing the offshore account numbers of the very Mafia commission Julian sat upon. "You weren't just running from an abusive husband, were you?" Julian's voice was no longer a protective silk. It was a razor edge. "You're the daughter of the man who ran the commission before I took over. You're the ghost princess who disappeared 10 years ago with the ledger that could put every boss in this city in a federal cage for life." The revelation hit like a physical blow. The vulnerable woman on the train wasn't just a victim. She was the most dangerous piece on the board. She had used Silas as a cover, a way to hide in plain sight as a suburban housewife while the underworld tore itself apart looking for her. "I had to," Clara snapped, her eyes flashing with a fire Julian hadn't seen before. "My father was a monster, Julian. He was going to sell me to a man twice my age to settle a debt. I took the ledger because it was my only life insurance. I married Silas because he was a nobody. I thought the commission would never look for a mob princess in the arms of a low-level accountant. And Silas." Julian stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "Did he know?" "No," Clara choked out, tears finally spilling over. "But he found the ledger 6 months ago. That's when the beating started. He didn't want a wife anymore, he wanted a payout. He was trying to break me so I'd give him the encryption keys." Julian stared at her, the betrayal warring with the raw passion he felt. He had risked his empire for a woman he thought needed saving, only to realize she was the very person who could destroy his entire way of life. The stakes weren't just at their highest point, they had surpassed the point of no return. If Julian kept her, his own men would execute him for harboring a traitor. If he turned her over, she was a dead woman. "I am shaking. Did you expect that? Clara isn't just a survivor. She's the key to the entire Mafia underworld. This changes everything, doesn't it? Now I have a massive challenge for you all. I want to see which city has the most loyal viewers. Comment your city and a fire if you think Julian should protect Clara even after finding out she lied. Or if you think he should put his empire first, comment, broken heart. Let's see who wins the debate. And if you're enjoying this 10,000-word journey, hit that subscribe button right now. We're heading into the darkest hour, And you'll need to be subscribed to see how they survive the fallout. Who's still with me? Let me know in the comments. Julian grabbed the ledger from the table and threw it into the corner. He didn't care about the numbers. He grabbed Clara's face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears with a rough, desperate affection. You lied to me, he growled. I survived, she shot back. Then survive this, Julian whispered before crashing his lips against hers in a kiss that tasted of salt, gunpowder, and a loyalty that defied all logic. But as they clung to each other in the safety of the bunker, the monitors flickered to life. The front gates were being rammed. It wasn't just Silas. It was the combined forces of the commission, and they weren't there to talk. The monitors in the bunker didn't just flicker, they screamed. The high-definition cameras captured a nightmare, a coordinated multi-point breach of the Moretti estate. Black-clad operators were fast roping from silent helicopters, while armored rams battered the reinforced front gates. This wasn't a skirmish, it was an execution of a kingdom. Julian's face went from passionate to glacial in a heartbeat. He turned to the gun rack hidden behind a false mahogany panel, pulling out a sleek, suppressed short-barrel rifle. Elias. Status. The radio crackled, the sound of heavy gunfire nearly drowning out Elias's voice. They've bypassed the outer sensors, boss. It's the commission. They aren't here for the ledger. They're here to wipe us out for harboring the ghost princess. They've cut the power to the main house. We're fighting on battery and blood now. Julian looked at Clara. The woman who had been a runaway wife, then a mystery and now a target. In this subterranean room, surrounded by concrete and the smell of ozone, the hopelessness of their situation settled in like a physical weight. The world was closing in, and for the first time in his life, Julian Corleone looked like a man who knew he might not see the sunrise. You have to go, Julian said, his voice flat, devoid of the warmth they had shared moments ago. There's a tunnel. It leads to a sea cave 2 miles north. There's a submersible waiting there. The coordinates are preset for a safe house in the Azores. Not without you, Clara said, her voice cracking but her eyes fierce. Julian, if you stay here they will kill you. They have the numbers. They have the commission's blessing. I am the distraction, Clara, Julian growled, grabbing a tactical vest and cinching it tight. If I'm not here to hold the line, they'll find the tunnel entrance in 10 minutes. If I stay, I can bottleneck them in the foyer. I can give you the window you need. I won't let another man die for me, she screamed, the trauma of her past colliding with the terror of the present. Julian grabbed her, his hands firm on her waist, pulling her flush against his tactical gear. I'm not dying for you, Clara. I'm living for the idea that you might actually get to be free. Don't make this a waste. He pressed a silver locket into her hand, the one that had belonged to his mother. Go. Now. As Elias's voice came over the comms again, they're in the West Wing. Losing ground. Julian shoved Clara toward the hidden hatch. The separation was a physical agony. She reached for him, her fingertips brushing his scarred knuckles one last time before the heavy steel door hissed shut, locking him on the side of the war and her on the side of the dark, damp unknown. Clara stumbled through the narrow, lightless tunnel, the sound of explosions above rattling the earth around her. Every boom felt like a piece of her heart breaking. She was alone again. Running again. The man who had looked at her with more than just desire, who had seen her soul behind the bruises, was standing in the center of a hurricane so she could breathe. Outside, the storm had turned into a gale. The sea was a churning maw of white foam and black water. As Clara reached the sea cave, she looked back at the cliff top. The Moretti estate was burning. Orange flames licked the night sky, casting a hellish glow over the water. She stood on the edge of the submersible's platform, the cold salt spray stinging her eyes. She had the ledger. She had her life. But as she looked at the burning fortress, she realized that surviving wasn't enough if the only person who made her feel alive was turning into ash on that cliff. The situation was insurmountable. The commission was too large, the fire too bright, and the silence from her radio too deafening. I can't believe we're at this point. My heart is actually racing as I write this. Julian is standing alone against an entire army, and Clara is watching her only hope go up in flames. Is this really how it ends for them? I need you guys more than ever right now. If you think Julian can make it out of that burning building, I want you to smash that like button and type "survive" in the comments. Let's send some energy to our Mafia boss. And for those of you who have been with us since part 1, where are you watching from? Are you as stressed as I am? Don't forget to subscribe. The turning point is coming, and you do not want to miss the final 3,000 words of this 10,000-word epic. Clara fell to her knees on the wet stone, the silver locket clutched to her chest. The darkness of the cave felt like a tomb. She had escaped Silas, she had escaped the commission, but she couldn't escape the crushing weight of a love that was being extinguished before it could truly burn. Suddenly, a shadow moved at the mouth of the cave. Not a man. A drone. A commission seeker bot, its red eye scanning the darkness. It had found her. Hope was gone. The darkest hour had arrived. The red eye of the seeker bot pulsed, a rhythmic mechanical heartbeat that signaled Clara's imminent discovery. She was trapped between the cold stone of the sea cave and the certain death of the commission's reach. But as the drone hummed closer, its scanners whirring to lock onto her thermal signature, something inside Clara didn't just break. It hardened. She looked at the silver locket Julian had pressed into her hand. It wasn't just a memento, it was a weight. A reminder that for 10 years she had been a ghost, a victim, and a prize. She had spent her life being defined by the men who wanted to own her or the men who wanted to save her. No more, she whispered, her voice rasping against the salt air. Clara didn't cower. She reached into her thrift store coat and pulled out the encrypted ledger, the one the entire underworld was burning a cliffside to find. She realized then that she wasn't the prey. She was the architect of the entire system's collapse. The ghost princess finally understood her true power. She didn't need a savior. She needed to become the storm. With a surge of adrenaline, Clara smashed the seeker bot with a heavy piece of driftwood, the mechanical eye sparking and dying in the dark. She didn't run for the submersible. She ran back toward the tunnel. As she sprinted through the narrow passage, the earth still trembling from the siege above, she pulled out the burner phone she'd kept hidden. She didn't call the police. She didn't call a lawyer. She dialed a number she had memorized a decade ago. The emergency override for the commission's internal server, a backdoor her father had built in case of a coup. "This is Clara Selena Kyle," she said into the receiver, her voice steady and lethal. "I am activating the Scorched Earth protocol on every offshore account linked to the Vane and Miller syndicates. If you want your billions to exist by sunrise, tell your men to stand down at the Moretti estate. Now." Above her the world changed. The heavy thud of explosions ceased. The frantic chatter on the tactical radios went silent. The key to the conflict wasn't a gun. It was the financial jugular of the monsters hunting her. Clara burst through the bunker hatch and into the smoke-filled foyer of the main house. The grand marble was stained with soot and blood. In the center of the wreckage stood Julian. He was leaning against a shattered pillar, his charcoal suit shredded, his rifle empty at his feet. He was surrounded by a dozen commissioned soldiers, their weapons leveled at his chest, frozen in place by the frantic orders screaming through their earpieces. Julian looked up, his face a mask of exhaustion and disbelief. "Clara? I told you to leave." "I'm done leaving, Julian," she said, stepping over the debris, the ledger held high like a holy relic. She walked straight past the confused soldiers and stood in front of the man who had been willing to die for her. For the first time, Julian saw not a woman who needed protection, but a partner who had just ended a war with a phone call. The courage in her eyes was a mirror of his own. The turning point wasn't just surviving the night. It was the realization that together they weren't just a mafia boss and a runaway, they were a new kind of power. "Can you hear me screaming?" Clara just took down the entire commission with a single phone call. That is the definition of a boss move. I am so proud of her journey from part 1 to now. I have a huge question for our global audience. What was the exact moment you knew Clara was going to fight back? Was it the locket? The seeker bot? Let me know in the comments. We are entering the final acts. The climax is coming and Julian and Clara still have to deal with the man who started it all. Silas Miller. If you want to see Silas get what's coming to him, give this video a thumbs up and make sure you've subscribed. We're almost at 10,000 words. Who's still here for the victory? Shout out your country. Julian reached out, his hand shaking slightly as he tucked a soot-stained lock of hair behind her ear. "You came back." "I told you," Clara whispered, leaning her forehead against his. "I like things that endure." The soldiers began to retreat, their orders absolute. But in the shadows of the burning doorway, a figure moved. Silas Miller, fueled by a coward's rage and the realization that his payout was vanishing, raised a hidden pistol. He didn't care about the money anymore. He wanted her dead. But Julian saw him. And this time he wasn't alone in the fight. The air in the foyer was a toxic cocktail of drywall dust, expensive cologne, and the metallic tang of spent brass. The commission soldiers had melted into the Trilene, their bank accounts frozen by the ghost princess. But the personal demon Clara had fled was still standing in the wreckage. Silas Miller, the man who had spent 3 years breaking her spirit, emerged from the smoke like a ghost of a life she had already buried. His expensive suit was scorched, his eyes bloodshot with a manic, cornered rat energy. He didn't have an army anymore. He didn't even have a plan. All he had was a snub-nosed .38 and a heart full of bruised ego. "You think you're a queen now, Clara?" Silas spat, his voice cracking. "You're just a thief. You stole my life. You stole my future when you took that ledger. You're coming back with me or no one gets you." Julian stepped in front of Clara, his hand reaching for the combat knife strapped to his thigh. His rifle was empty, his body battered, but Clara didn't move behind him this time. She stepped beside him. She was no longer Clara Hamilton, the victim. She was the woman who had brought the Mafia to its knees with a dial tone. "The ledger is gone, Silas," Clara said, her voice echoing with a terrifying, calm authority. "I've already uploaded the encryption keys to a dead man's switch. If Julian dies, every cent you've ever hidden, every offshore shell company you've ever touched evaporates. You'll be a pauper in a world full of people who want you dead for losing their money." Silas roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage, and leveled the gun at her chest. In that heartbeat the world slowed. Julian didn't hesitate. He lunged not for Silas but to knock the gun upward. The crack of the pistol echoed through the vaulted ceiling, a chandelier of Venetian glass shattering and raining down like diamond dust. Julian tackled Silas into the remains of a marble fountain, the two men crashing into the shallow, soot-covered water. It was a brutal, ugly fight. No cinematic grace, just the raw desperation of a predator losing his grip and a protector finally ending a nightmare. Silas scrambled for the gun, his fingers clawing at the wet stone, but Julian's hand clamped around his wrist like a vice. "You touched her for the last time," Julian growled, his voice a low, subterranean rumble. With a sharp, tactical twist, Julian disarmed him, the pistol skittering across the floor toward Clara's feet. Claire looked down at the weapon. Her breath hitched. For a second, the 3 years of pain flashed before her eyes. Every closed door, every raised hand, every night spent weeping in a cold bathroom. She picked up the gun. Julian froze. Silas, pinned beneath Julian's weight, stared up at the barrel of the gun held by the woman he thought he had broken. "Do it, Clara," Silas wheezed, a sick smile touching his lips. "Become the monster. Show your new boyfriend what you really are." Clara stared at him through the sights. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The silence in the burning house was absolute. Then, slowly, deliberately, she engaged the safety and tossed the gun into the dark, churning water of the fountain. "No," Clara said, her voice ringing with a newfound purity. "Killing you would be an act of mercy, Silas. And I don't owe you anything. Not even a bullet." Outside, the distant wail of sirens began to climb the cliffside. Julian stood up, pulling Silas up by the collar and shoving him toward the approaching lights. Elias appeared from the shadows, his face bloodied but triumphant, taking the shivering coward into custody. Julian turned to Clara. He was covered in soot, his shoulder was bleeding, and his empire was a smoking ruin. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw the woman who had saved herself. He didn't reach for her as a prize. He reached for her as an equal. "The commission is gone," Julian whispered, the adrenaline finally fading into a deep, bone-weary relief. "Silas is gone. There's nothing left to run from." "Then maybe," Clara said, her hand finding his scarred knuckles and interlacing their fingers, "it's finally time to start walking toward something." Oh my God. Did you see that? The strength it took for Clara to throw that gun away. That is true victory. She didn't just survive Silas, she outgrew him. I'm actually tearing up right now. What a moment. I have to ask, did you think she was going to pull the trigger? I definitely did for a second. Drop a yes or no in the comments. We are at the final stretch. 9,000 words in and only one part left to go. How do you think their new life begins? Before we move to the final act, please make sure you've subscribed and hit the notification bell. I want to see a Team Clara in the comments from every single one of you who cheered when she stood her ground. Where are my viewers in Brazil and Australia? I see you. As the sun began to peek over the horizon, painting the smoke-filled sky in shades of bruised purple and gold, Julian led Clara away from the wreckage. The fortress was gone, but for the first time in both of their lives, they were truly, undeniably free. The charred remains of the Moretti estate stood as a jagged silhouette against a dawn that finally felt earned. As the last of the embers cooled, the air wasn't filled with the scent of destruction, but with the crisp, salt-tinged promise of a world without shadows. The sirens had faded, the Commission's power had been dismantled by the very data Clara held, and the man who had haunted her dreams was now a ghost in a prison cell. 6 months later, the setting was no longer a cliffside fortress, but a sun-drenched coastal town in the south of Italy. The cobblestone streets smelled of blooming bougainvillea and fresh espresso. Here the name Moretti was unknown, and the ghost princess had finally materialized into a woman named Clara Selina from Batman, Deneuve from Belle de Jour. Clara stood in the doorway of a small, whitewashed storefront. Above the door a hand-painted wooden sign swayed in the breeze, the Hidden Crumb. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of rising yeast and cinnamon, the scent of the life she had once dreamt of before the world tried to break her. She was no longer running, she was kneading, shaping, and building something with her own 2 hands. A bell chimed over the door and a man stepped in. He wasn't wearing a charcoal wool suit or carrying a silver-topped cane. Instead, Julian K. from American Gigolo was dressed in a simple linen shirt, his sleeves rolled up to reveal the scars on his knuckles. Scars that no longer felt like marks of war, but badges of a life lived for something greater than power. The flower shipment just arrived at the docks, Julian said, his voice still that low, grounding rumble, but now lightened by a peace he had never known in the dark corridors of the city. He walked behind the counter, his large hands settling naturally on Clara's waist. "You look like you've been fighting with a bag of sugar," she laughed, reaching up to wipe a smudge of white powder from his cheek. The touch was easy, devoid of the frantic desperation of the train or the bunker. It was the touch of 2 people who had found home in each other. "I'd take a sugar fight over the Commission any day," Julian whispered, leaning down to press a soft, lingering kiss to her forehead. They had used the remnants of the Moretti fortune, the parts that weren't tied to blood, to fund a local sanctuary for women escaping domestic violence, ensuring that no one else would have to board a midnight train with nothing but fear as their guide. Julian had traded his throne for a life of quiet service, finding that protecting one woman's smile was more rewarding than ruling 1,000 shadows. Clara looked out the window at the sparkling Mediterranean. She thought about the girl on the train, the one with the bruised wrist and the shattered heart. That girl was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her own worth, a woman who had saved a king and in doing so became a queen of her own destiny. The mystery of the man on the train had been solved. He wasn't the monster she feared, but the shield she deserved. And as they stood together in the golden light of their new beginning, the only thing they were running toward was the rest of their lives. "We made it. 10,000 words later and my heart is finally at peace. What an incredible journey we've been on together." From that first tense moment on the train to this beautiful sunrise in Italy, Clara and Julian truly earned their happy ending. I want to say a massive thank you to everyone who stayed until the very end. You guys are the heartbeat of this channel. Final call. If you loved this story, please leave a comment with the word freedom, so I know you saw the conclusion. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and hit that like button. Your support means everything to me. Where are you watching from? Tell me one last time in the comments. Would you like me to start a brand new story with a different title, or should we do a bonus scene from Julian and Clara's new life? Let me know.